Thank you.
The corporate report. It's not a corporate report. What is this report?
Well, this is a publication by Juta, who is the most important publisher of legal and commercial journals in South Africa. And they thought it was a requirement or necessary in the marketplace because of all the new legislation which has been passed, the CPA, the NCA, etc., having a huge impact on business models of companies. And of course, King 3 and the new listing requirements. And the GFC, and what's happening at the moment in the Eurozone. All this is hugely impactful on corporate life today. And yet there's no publication that sort of encapsulates all this. And the purpose of this is that leaders in business and leaders in academia write articles, contribute on a without remuneration basis, and the royalties, etc., for me and my co-editors and others go for the training of young directors and for arbitration and mediation, dispute resolution being critical in the modern economy.
All the issues that you talk about, each of them could have several books on them on their own. So is this a big brick? Is it a short book?
Here it is, in fact.
Oh, there it is, right.
So before we go anywhere,
it's not a brick, but it's fairly substantial.
Of course, yeah. It's got, I mean, interesting articles also, David, just looking at one of them, Michael Caper, writing an opinion piece on the Companies Act and titling it Rolls-Royce or Ford Edsel. What are the big issues right now with the Companies Act? There are many, and they're all being kind of ironed out, but what would you say is on the table right now in terms of that?
Well, the answer to you, there are many issues.
Yeah.
It's ship sailing on a tempestuous sea. That's not my phraseology. That's Hennigsberg, the famous book on Company Act. They've just issued their new Hennigsberg on the company law on the new Companies Act. There are many pieces of the legislation that have been introduced from Canadian law and New Zealand law and other foreign jurisdictions. So we have foreign concepts in our corporate law, which has been in practice in South Africa since about 1860, which has been based mainly on the English Companies Act. So we have sections which are causing a lot of debate, non-binding opinions being issued by the Department of Trade and Industry, many issues still to be determined by our courts, and great uncertainty in the corporate world how to operate in
within
regard
all
to
this
certain
uncertainty
sections.
as to whether this is going to apply to them or not.
And hence one of the drivers to the creation of the corporate report, which will be 3 issues every year. So every 4 months it will come out dealing with a critical issue. And Michael Cooper's article, Senior Commercial Silk in South Africa, very interesting article. He says, well, is it a Rolls-Royce or is it a Ford Edsel? He concludes it's a Ford Edsel. The door's falling off the carpet.
Very strong words from him, and quite a humorous article.
Yes, it's a historical piece, but it sends the message that there are issues and problems.
What about you mentioned the grafting on of other legislation, and certainly our tax authorities have done that. They've done their research, and then they've grafted this on. Some of it arguably inappropriate to our country, our financial system very sophisticated, but other parts of our system not. So are there things here which this report would say, you've got to put up with it, but be very careful because actually it doesn't suit us?
Yes, that's exactly the purpose of the corporate report, is to keep business persons informed of the dangers surrounding them with all this legislation. And I think you just have to look at the CPA, the NCA, the new labour legislation, and then look at the new Companies Act. You put those together, and the directive today has got huge problems.
Let's personalise it and director liability. That's perhaps the thing that focuses directors. The rest, they might say, leave it to the compliance department. I'm sure we've got people who will look after that. But hey, if I'm liable for this and could go to jail, guidance on that?
Well, one thing the new Companies Act has done is followed a recommendation from King 2, which was to incorporate into our corporate statute law the business judgment rule, which ameliorates directors' liability, where directors really face liabilities and the duty of care, because the director has a duty to take risk for reward, so he has to make business judgment calls. None of us is prescient, so that we do make mistakes in our judgment calls. I've made many in my life, got many corporate scars on my body. And what the business judgment rule says, if you had no personal financial interest in the issue, if objectively speaking you had all the facts before the board, and the board came to a rational business decision as it appeared at that time, even though 7 years later it turns out to be the wrong business judgment call and causes harm and loss to the company, you raise that as a defence. Now this is a huge amelioration for directors' liability.
Another issue is the Social and Ethics Committee, which is has been formed under the new Companies Act, and how that applies to companies right now. How many companies, for example, on the JSE Top 40 or the JSE or with the top 100 companies have formed the Social and Ethics Committee? Is there a lot of uncertainty around it right now?
Well, I can't answer that question. How many? All I can tell you, the law is they should have done it.
Yeah.
The question of how many have done it, I cannot answer you. But the Social and Ethics Committee, there's an article on it in the corporate report, has complicated, simplified issues. And so some companies are finding it helpful. Some companies are finding it an additional burden. And, for example, one of the issues which the statute says the Social and Ethics Committee has to consider sustainability issues. Now, that's a critical issue for consideration by the board, and yet you have a subcommittee looking at that.
So there is the issue that it's being taken away from the board and put into a separate space where it should be at the heart of the company, basically.
Well, it can be, but a board can delegate, but it can never abdicate its responsibility. So even statutory or otherwise, you can move it to a subcommittee, but the board's always got the responsibility. So the board has to check what they have done and then apply its mind and approve it.
Of course, the other issue which we don't have time to get into, but I know you have you've highlighted before, is we need skills for this, and there's a shortage of directors who have to oversee all this. So hopefully the corporate report will be a manual and a guideline for these overworked directors. That was Mervyn King, Editor-in-Chief of the Corporate Report.